The night he decided to record himself was supposed to be his last calm evening before leaving town for good. But the camera he placed in the corner of his bedroom captured something far darker than he ever expected. He sits at the edge of his bed, talking softly into the lens, explaining that strange things have been happening around the house lights flickering, footsteps in empty rooms, and whispers behind closed doors. He admits he hasn't slept properly in weeks and feels like someone or something is watching him. As he starts describing the exact moment everything changed, a sudden thump echoes from the hallway, making him look back in fear. But he forces a smile and tells the camera he's probably just paranoid. He doesn't know that this recording will become the center of a future investigation, analyzed frame by frame by detectives who will struggle to believe what they see. In that small room lit only by a single lamp, he has no idea that the footage he captures tonight will be the last evidence of him ever being home, and that the final hour he documents will leave investigators questioning whether the truth is something far more terrifying than a simple disappearance. He pressed the small red button on his camera, the same camera he had received on his 18th birthday, and set it on the wooden dresser facing his bed. The room looked ordinary to ordinary for what he felt inside. A dim lamp flickered near the window, shadows crawling across the peeling wallpaper like nervous fingers. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring straight into the lens with eyes drained of sleep and heavy with something else fear. Not the kind that visits and leaves, but the kind that moves in quietly and stays. He sighed, rubbing his hands together as he began speaking into the camera, his voice low, trembling, and uneven. If anything happens tonight, if something goes wrong, this is my record. My truth, his words hung in the air like a fragile thread. For the past week, strange things had been happening inside the old family house, footsteps in the hallways at night, doors unlocking by themselves. Whispers that sounded like they came from inside the walls. He told his friends, but they brushed it off as imagination or stress. He told his brother, who laughed and said the house was simply old and cranky, but he knew what he had heard, what he had seen. And tonight felt different, worse. The air felt heavier, colder, almost watching him. He stood up and walked to the window, pulling the curtains aside. The street outside was empty, not a single car or person in sight. The neighborhood had grown strangely quiet in the past few days, as if everyone else sensed something he was just discovering. When he turned back toward the room, the camera captured a sudden flicker of motion in the corner, something low, shadowy, and silent. He didn't see it. But the camera did. He tried to distract himself, walking around the room, straightening books on the shelf, fixing his blankets, pretending everything was normal, pretending he wasn't scared. His voice filled the room again. I keep hearing knocking from the attic. Last night it was louder, like someone was crawling. He paused. Double quotes, no. Not someone. Something. His breath hitched at the last word. He sat back down, leaning toward the camera, whispering now as if the walls had ears. I know no one will believe me. But I'm not alone in this house. I haven't been alone for days. At that moment, a soft thud echoed from the hallway. His head snapped toward the door. The camera captured the way his shoulders stiffened, his eyes widening, his breath freezing. Another thud followed, closer this time. He stood slowly and reached for the door handle, but stopped halfway, fear rooting him in place. The camera's audio picked up faint shuffling beyond the door. Something dragging across the floor. He whispered, "It's here again." With a trembling hand, he locked the door and backed away, his chest rising and falling fast. He glanced at the camera one more time, as if silently begging it to remember everything he couldn't explain. The thuds grew louder, turning into sharp bangs that made the wooden door jitter in its frame. He grabbed his phone and dialed his brother, but the call didn't go through. It cut off immediately. The last thing the camera captured before Chapter 1 ends was him sitting against the wall, knees pressed to his chest, whispering to the camera with tears forming in his eyes. "If I don't make it through the night, someone, please, watch this." Detective Laura Hale replayed the clip 3 more times, her eyes narrowing every time the faint knocking echoed from behind Ethan's bedroom door. It sounded too soft to be forced entry, too hesitant to be a burglar, and too controlled to be the wind. "Someone knew he was alone," she muttered, pausing the video right at the moment Ethan looked toward the door, his breathing quickening not out of fear, but familiarity. Whoever was outside, he expected them. She stood in Ethan's living room, scanning the space. It was immaculate, books stacked neatly, his laptop still open on the coffee table, and the faint smell of cinnamon lingering in the air. There were no signs of struggle, no overturned furniture, no broken glass, nothing violent. Yet Ethan was missing. Vanished without a trace. Laura walked toward the hallway, the same hallway Ethan had filmed. Something felt off about the walls. They looked recently scrubbed, too clean compared to the rest of the house. She shined her flashlight closer and noticed faint scratches along the paint. Fingernail scratches. Someone had clawed at the wall, desperately, silently. She exhaled sharply. Ethan didn't go willingly. She returned to the station, where her partner, Detective Ramon, was waiting with Ethan's phone records. "You need to see this," he said, sliding the papers to her. Ethan had received 3 calls the day he disappeared from an unregistered number. The same number had called him repeatedly at midnight for weeks, always hanging up after for seconds. Laura frowned. He was being watched. Ramon played another portion of the recovered footage. After Ethan whispered to the door, the camera picked up a faint voice, distorted, trembling. They enhanced it. "Ethan, please. You promised." Laura's stomach tightened. "A promise." A second voice, a woman. Someone Ethan knew well. They dug deeper, combing through Ethan's social life. He had no siblings, his parents lived out of state, and he wasn't dating anyone. But one name kept resurfacing in conversations with neighbors, Lena Rivers. A former girlfriend from years ago. A woman who, according to neighbors, had searched for Ethan multiple times over the past month. But Lena had supposedly moved away years ago. And when they checked her last known address, the house had been abandoned for 6 years. Mid-afternoon, Laura drove to the old Rivers residence. It sat isolated behind overgrown bushes and shattered windows. Pushing the door open, she stepped into silence thick enough to feel. Dust covered every surface except a single table in the living room. On it lay a stack of photographs. Ethan in high school. Ethan at the park. Ethan walking home from work last month. Someone had been watching him obsessively. Flipping to the last photo, Laura froze. It was taken the night Ethan disappeared. The angle suggested the photographer was standing outside his house. Moments before Ethan pressed record, she turned at a sudden creaking sound from upstairs. Every instinct told her to leave. But she climbed the staircase slowly, gun ready. A bedroom door at the end was slightly open. Inside, on the bed, sat a small device, a voice recorder with a pink ribbon tied around it. Something a teenage girl might decorate. Laura pressed play. Ethan's voice filled the room. "Lena, I'm sorry. I thought you moved on." "I thought," but another voice cut in, soft yet broken. "You promised you wouldn't leave me alone again." Laura stepped back, heart pounding. Not because of the words, but because the second voice was unmistakably older, hoarse, trembling. Lena Rivers hadn't moved away, she had never left town, and she wasn't the teenage girl from Athens past anymore. Something had happened to her, something that twisted her voice and her mind. The final seconds of the recording made Laura's blood run cold. Tonight, Lena whispered, "You're coming with me, and this time, you won't break your promise." Detective Laura Hale stood frozen, staring at the dusty bedroom walls as the chilling replay of Lena's voice echoed through her mind. The words were possessive, desperate, and disturbingly resolute, someone clinging to a past that Ethan clearly tried to escape. She backed away from the recorder slowly, her instincts screaming that this room, this entire house, had been lived in recently. She checked the dresser, dust everywhere except one drawer, fresh fingerprints on the handle. Inside lay women's clothes neatly folded, a hairbrush with long strands of brown hair, and a cracked hand mirror. Laura picked it up. A message was carved on the glass, "He's mine, always." Her breath hitched. Ramon called her. "Laura, you need to get back." "We found something in Ethan's attic." She hurried back to Ethan's home, unease spreading in her chest like frost. Ramon led her up the narrow attic ladder. "We found this stuffed behind the insulation." He held a small showbox. Inside were letters, dozens of them. All from Lena. The earliest dated back 10 years. "Ethan, please don't leave. I can't breathe when you're not here. You promised you wouldn't abandon me like they did." Each message grew more frantic, less coherent, blending affection with obsession. But the most shocking letter was dated 2 months ago. "You moved, I know. But I'll find you. Don't worry, Ethan. I always find you." Laura shut her eyes. Ethan had tried to disappear from someone who refused to let him go. They continued searching the attic when Ramon pointed at something wedged between 2 beams. A camera, old, dusty, but with a memory card still inserted. They played the footage back at the station. The video showed Ethan sitting in a dimly lit room, this very attic. His face was pale, panicked. "If anyone finds this," Lena came back. "I don't know how she found me again." He looked toward the ceiling as if expecting footsteps. "She said we're supposed to finish what we started. I don't know what that means. But she's not the same person I knew. There's something wrong with her, something very wrong." He swallowed hard. "Tonight she said she'd come for me. I'm leaving this here. Please help me." The video ended. Ramon exhaled. He knew he was in danger. Night fell as Laura drove to the one place Lena might hide, an old cabin behind the forest, once owned by her late uncle. Locals whispered about it. Strange lights. Strange noises. Laura parked and approached cautiously. The door was locked from the outside. Odd. She broke the latch and stepped in. The stench of mildew and something metallic hung thick in the air. Inside, blankets were spread across the floor, photographs taped to the walls, every one of Ethan. Different years, different angles, some taken from disturbing distances. At the center lay a table with melted candles surrounding a journal. Laura opened it. "Ethan will understand when he remembers. He forgot our night, I didn't. I waited 10 years for him. Tonight we become one again." A noise snapped behind her. A figure stepped into the candlelight, thin, pale, trembling, breathing heavily. A woman. Lena. Her hair tangled, eyes bloodshot, but face eerily calm. She stared at Laura with a smile too wide to be sane. "You're too late," Lena whispered. "He's already with me." Before Laura could react, Lena bolted through a back door leading into the forest, disappearing into darkness. Laura chased her, but the woods swallowed everything: sound, shape, trail. After 20 minutes, Lena was gone. Completely. Laura returned to the cabin. Something gleamed under the blankets. She lifted the cloth with shaking hands: a wallet. A torn sleeve of Ethan's shirt, and dirt. Fresh dirt. Laura's heart dropped. Lena hadn't taken Ethan far. She buried him. Or she thought she did. Suddenly, a call came through. Raymond's voice was panicked. "Laura, you need to come back now." Ethan just walked into the station. Laura stared at the dark forest, speechless. Ethan was alive. But what happened in that forest was only going to get stranger. Detective Laura Hale rushed into the station, expecting to find Ethan traumatized, exhausted, maybe even barely conscious. But instead, he sat calmly on the bench, a blanket around his shoulders, sipping warm tea like a man who had simply taken an evening walk. What unnerved her wasn't his calmness, but his eyes. They looked empty, distant, hollow, as if a part of him was still lost. "Ethan," she said gently, sitting across from him. "We found traces that someone tried to hurt you. Do you remember what happened?" He blinked slowly. "She found me." His voice was quiet. "Just like she promised, Lena," Laura pressed. But Ethan shook his head. "No. The woman in the cabin, that wasn't Lena." He turned his head toward the window, staring into nothing. "She kept saying she was Lena. But she wasn't." "Not anymore." Laura exchanged a worried glance with Ramon. "Where were you?" she asked. Ethan swallowed hard. "She dragged me into the woods. She kept talking about how I left her alone for years. How I broke our promise. I kept telling her I didn't remember. I didn't know what she meant." His voice cracked. "She cried. She begged. Then she laughed. She said if I couldn't remember our past, she'd make me remember our ending." "What ending?" Laura asked. Ethan looked down at his shaking hands. "She dug a grave. A shallow one. Told me she made it for herself years ago. Then she looked at me and said she realized it was meant for me instead." He let out a trembling breath. "Then she told me to lie down." Ramon leaned forward. "How did you escape?" Ethan blinked again, confusion clouding his expression. "I don't know." He shook his head as if trying to pull memories from fog. "I remember lying down. I remember dirt on my face. Then I was here." At the station, Laura felt a chill run through her. One moment Ethan was buried alive, the next he appeared miles away with no memory of the time in between. "Ethan," she said firmly. "Do you know where she went?" A pause. A long one. "I don't think she left," he whispered. "I think she's watching me right now." That night, Laura assigned 2 officers to guard Ethan's home while she reviewed the cabin again. The forest was still, eerily quiet. She searched the burial site Ethan described, but there was no disturbed soil. No footprints. No sign anyone had been there at all. Almost like the entire scene vanished. She returned to her car, frustrated, when her flashlight caught something near a tree. A torn piece of fabric. Beige. Ethan's shirt color. But it was old, weather-worn, frayed, brittle. She picked it up. How could a shirt torn hours ago look years old? She froze as a soft voice whispered through the trees. "You're too late, detective." "He promised me forever." Laura spun around, gun raised. No one there. Her phone rang sharply, making her jump. It was Ramon again. "Laura, you need to come back. What now?" she asked, gripping her flashlight. He hesitated. "Ethan's gone." He walked out without saying a word. The officers didn't see him leave. "And one more thing, there's something on the station surveillance footage." Laura's stomach dropped. "What?" Raymond's voice was tight. A woman walked out right behind him. But when she reached the door, the camera glitched. And when it recovered, she wasn't there. Laura closed her eyes. This wasn't obsession. This wasn't kidnapping. This wasn't even human. Whatever Lena had become, whatever Ethan had promised her years ago, it wasn't over. Not even close. The house felt unbearably silent after everything that had come to light, as if the walls themselves were still holding their breath. Detectives stood in the dimly lit living room, the hum of the overhead fan cutting through the tension, while the last frame of the footage remained frozen on the screen. His terrified eyes staring directly into the camera, as though begging the future to understand what he could no longer say. What he left behind was not just evidence, but a final warning, a final confession, and a final cry for help that no one heard in time. And as the investigators replayed his last night again and again, each moment revealed a haunting truth. He knew something was coming, something he couldn't fully describe, but something he tried desperately to document before it arrived. Neighbors later said they remembered him as quiet, gentle, the kind of man who lived unnoticed. But now, his last night was being examined frame by frame, sound by sound, shadow by shadow, because the answers he couldn't speak were hidden somewhere in the silence he recorded. In the end, the footage didn't just shock detectives. It changed the direction of the entire investigation. The truth was darker than anyone expected, and the man who documented his final hours had unknowingly opened a door to a secret no one was prepared to face. As the camera slowly faded to black in that final moment, there was one lingering message he left behind, not with words, but with the urgency in his eyes. Pay attention to the things people hide, because sometimes the danger is already inside the house. And even though his story ended that night, the impact of the footage lived on, helping countless people recognize the signs of something sinister before it was too late. If you want more chilling, emotional, deeply human stories like this, stories based on real events, unexplained cases, and the hidden truths behind them, then make sure you never miss what comes next. Life is unpredictable, and sometimes the most ordinary moments hide the most extraordinary secrets. So before you go, remember to subscribe to the channel and gently tap that bell icon, because each week we bring you gripping true crime style stories, real incident narratives, emotional mysteries, and chilling investigations that stay with you long after the screen goes dark. Your support helps us create more powerful stories like this, stories that reveal, warn, and remind us of the things we often overlook. Thank you for watching until the end. Stay safe, stay aware, and never ignore the moments that feel just a little too quiet.